The last couple of times we've been together, the question's been asked again, and it has been at various times over the years. And that question is, what is our relationship with life now? So it's hoped that you won't mind if, by way of justification, go back to being a little bit technical about our exploration into alchemy. And as has been said, there are three ways of alchemy. One is the way where there are those who seek to make base metal into gold to become rich. There's the way of those who are seeking the elixir of immortality. And there are those who are equating it and living it indeed as a way of becoming enlightened, so to speak. But when we look at all three ways, they have the same process. And that process is one of purification and refinement in stages. And those stages are always the same. There's the burning to remove the dross. There's the addition of further ingredients. And there is the setting aside of the mixture to allow it to settle into its new structure. So, in the way of alchemy, to ask the question, what is our relationship with life now, is like that moment when the mixture has finished its bubbling, its refinement of that particular stage, and it's put aside to rest, to settle into its new state of being. And equating, using the third way of alchemy, to recognize that we need to make a little summation of where we're at. And so this question is asked, what is our relationship with life now? Recognizing that every stage of refinement, every burning and addition of ingredients and setting aside is putting us into a new relationship with life. So there are several little stories that perhaps will allow us to make that summation. First, there's the story of that monastery. It was renowned because it was renowned for its abbess. She was a unique, knowledgeable, enlightened, compassionate, wise being. And many came to that monastery to seek her wisdom, and some sought entry to the monastery to learn her ways. Now it so happened that there was a young man who came to the monastery door. He was about 35 years old, and he begged, please, I need to find a teacher who will teach me how to be enlightened and find peace. Can you help me? And there were those there who said, yes, this is possible. But first you must pass a test. You must go into this anteroom of the monastery and remain alone for 7 days and nights. Well, the young man was desperate. Yes, 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 I'll do anything, he said. So he was ushered into the little anteroom of the monastery. Well, for the first 2 days, he was like a caged animal. He paced back and forth and back and forth. He stamped his feet. just like he was rattling the bars of some kind of cage. And then for the next 2 days, it was as though he were like one of those old Chinese women who had had their feet bound from the earliest age, and the binding had been taken off. Pain, excruciating pain, like a soul emerging from captivity and confinement. So he wept. For 2 days he wept. Tears, floods of tears. And then, for the next 2 days, he reviewed his life. He went over all the memories, painful and happy, of his youth, to where he was at now, in the corporate world, a wife and several children, responsibilities. And on the 7th day, he finally found a modicum of peace, a peace that he'd never experienced before. And then the door opened, and the old abbess herself came in and congratulated him on passing the test of being in that room for 7 days and nights. And she said to him, "We've found the perfect teacher for you." And she took his hand and led him out down the path of the monastery to the monastery gate. And when the gate was opened, outside the gate stood his wife and 2 children with their arms open to welcome him. And the old abbess said, "This is your perfect teacher." And he ran to them with his arms open. Then there's that little anecdote about the nun. She'd been in the monastery for many years, since being a young child, always longing for liberation. So certain gifts had come to her, as we know that they do, from that concentration. And she knew that it was coming to her time. And so she invited all her companions in the monastery, the monks and the nuns, to build a bier for her. And when it was built, all the twigs, the pieces of wood were piled high. She climbed atop the bier and waited. And along came the abbot and lit the fire. The flames leapt up around her. And then suddenly, from those who were observing, one of them shouted to her and said, "Ma, Ma, is the fire hot?" And she replied, "Such a question would only bother a stupid fellow like you." And she shouted from the depths of her soul, soul, what we could describe as the name of God. But she was a Buddhist, so perhaps it was just a sound and made her transition. And lastly, there's that true anecdote of the great saint Ramakrishna, who after a particular night of kirtan, dancing ecstatically with his followers, that he went into the gardens of the temple and went into a deep, deep state of nirvikalpa samadhi. It is well known that if the body remains in this state for 21 days, it drops. And as Ramakrishna was sitting there, a wandering monk came by and saw him in that state, recognized it, seeing the birds nesting in his hair and the ants crawling up his nose. And so he took a stick and beat Ramakrishna and forced him to take some sustenance, a bowl of curd, perhaps, bringing him from that state which would have seen the dropping of his physical form. When we mix these three ingredients into whatever receptacle it is that remains, what is the realization? What is the essence of these three that can bring for us an awareness and an ability to answer the question, what is our relationship with life now? What arises as an essence from these three anecdotes?